Hello and welcome to MRCPsych on the Go Revision Essentials. My name is Dr. Alapasurlicker and I'm a psychiatry trainee in the west of Scotland. Like many of you, I spent a lot of time commuting. This was valuable time that I could have spent revising for the MRCPsych examination. And so, I've started this podcast to help you revise on the go. Each episode breaks down one high-yield topic mapped to the syllabus. This is then followed by 5 questions to help reinforce your learning. So, grab your headphones, turn travel time into revision time, and let's get started. In 1962, 2 psychologists ran an experiment that changed how we think about emotion. They injected participants with adrenaline, but they told different groups different things about what to expect. Some were told the truth, others were told nothing, and some were placed in rooms with either a cheerful or an angry actor. The result? The same injection produced completely different emotional experiences depending on the context. This was not a trick, it was a demonstration that emotion is not just in the body, it is in the mind's interpretation of the body. In episodes 22 and 23, we explored the James Lang and Cannon-Bar theories. Both focus primarily on the relationship between physiological arousal and emotional experience. In this episode, we turn to cognitive appraisal theories, which bring the mind firmly back into the picture. Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer were American psychologists working in the early 1960s at Columbia University. Their 2-factor theory proposed that emotion depends on 2 things. The first factor is physiological arousal. The second factor is a cognitive label that the individual applies to explain that arousal. The theory is sometimes called the jukebox theory of emotion. Arousal provides the energy, like coins in a jukebox, but the cognitive label selects the tune. Without the label, the arousal is just undifferentiated energy. The theory builds on both James Lang and Cannon-Bar. Like James Lang, it acknowledges that physiological arousal is a necessary component of emotion. Like Cannon-Bar, it recognises that arousal alone is not sufficient to produce a specific emotion. In their adrenaline experiment, participants who were uninformed about the drug's effects looked to their environment for an explanation of their arousal. Those placed with a euphoric actor reported feeling euphoric. Those placed with an angry actor reported feeling angry. The same physiological state produced different emotions. The difference was entirely in the cognitive label applied. Remember, the Schachter-Singer 2-factor theory proposes that emotion requires both physiological arousal and a cognitive label applied to explain that arousal. The same arousal can produce different emotions depending on how it is interpreted. The 2-factor theory leads to an important and counterintuitive implication. If we misidentify the source of our arousal, we may experience an entirely different emotion as a result. This phenomenon is called misattribution of arousal. The classic demonstration is the suspension bridge study. Men crossing a high, swaying suspension bridge over a deep gorge were approached by an attractive female experimenter. She gave them her phone number and invited them to call if they wanted to discuss the research further. A second group of men were approached in the same way, but on a low, stable bridge. Men on the high bridge were far more likely to call the experimenter afterwards. They also wrote more romantic content in a story writing task given at the time. The researchers proposed that the physiological arousal produced by the frightening bridge was misattributed to attraction towards the experimenter. This has real clinical relevance, Patients experiencing anxiety-related arousal in social situations may misattribute this arousal as evidence that something is genuinely wrong. This can reinforce catastrophic appraisals and avoidance behaviours, maintaining the anxiety disorder. But misattribution of arousal is not just a clinical phenomenon. You may have experienced it yourself. Have you ever felt irritable and snappy, only to realise you had not eaten for hours? That feeling of hunger being mistaken for anger even has its own name. Hanger. The physical signal of an empty stomach is misread as the emotion of irritability. That is the two-factor theory in everyday life. The arousal is real, but the label we attach to it is wrong. Remember, misattribution of arousal occurs when physiological arousal from one source is attributed to a different cause, producing a corresponding but inaccurate emotional experience. The Schachter Singer theory has attracted important criticisms. First, the original experiment has proven difficult to replicate. Subsequent studies have not consistently reproduced the findings, raising questions about the robustness of the evidence. Second, the theory assumes that undifferentiated arousal precedes emotional labelling. But there is evidence that different emotions do produce somewhat distinct physiological signatures. Fear and anger, for example, can be distinguished by differences in peripheral skin temperature and heart rate patterns. Third, the theory may underestimate how quickly emotional experiences arise, often before any conscious labelling can occur. Remember, criticisms of the two-factor theory include difficulties with replication, evidence for physiological specificity between emotions, and the speed of emotional experience relative to conscious labelling. Lazarus and cognitive appraisal. Richard Lazarus was an American psychologist at the University of California. He's best known for his work on stress, coping, and emotion. He spent much of his career arguing that cognition is not simply one ingredient in emotion. He believed it is the essential ingredient. Lazarus proposed that we continuously and automatically evaluate events in terms of their significance for our well-being. He called this process appraisal. He described two stages of appraisal. Primary appraisal involves asking, is this situation relevant to my goals or well-being? An event may be appraised as irrelevant, positive, or stressful. A stressful appraisal can involve harm or challenge. Secondary appraisal involves asking, what can I do about this? This involves evaluating available coping resources, including personal abilities, social support, and practical options. The emotion we experience depends on the outcome of this appraisal process, not on the event itself, and not solely on our bodily state. Two people can face an identical situation and feel completely different emotions. One person appraises a job interview as a threat. They feel anxious. Another appraises it as a challenge. They feel excited. The situation is the same. The appraisal is different. The emotion differs. Lazarus also proposed the concept of reappraisal. This refers to consciously revising our interpretation of a situation to change its emotional impact. Cognitive reappraisal is a core strategy in cognitive behavioural therapy and is strongly supported by evidence. Remember, Lazarus proposed that emotional experience is determined by cognitive appraisal. Primary appraisal evaluates whether a situation is significant or threatening. Secondary appraisal evaluates available coping resources. Reappraisal is the revision of this interpretation. These theories have direct relevance to everyday psychiatric practice. The two-factor theory helps explain why patients in heightened states of arousal, such as during a panic attack or a manic episode, may misinterpret their physical symptoms and label them in ways that worsen their presentation. Lazarus's appraisal model underpins cognitive behavioural therapy directly. When a patient catastrophizes, they are making a primary appraisal of threat with an underestimation of their coping resources in secondary appraisal. Reappraisal is also central to acceptance and commitment therapy and to emotion regulation strategies used in dialectical behaviour therapy. Remember, the two-factor theory informs our understanding of symptom misinterpretation in heightened states. Lazarus's appraisal model underpins cognitive behaviour therapy directly. Now, let's test your recall. I will read out 5 exam-style questions. After each one, I will pause for 10 seconds so you can attempt them before hearing the answer. Question 1. A patient in the emergency department becomes increasingly panicked after noticing their heart racing. They become convinced something is catastrophically wrong. Which theory explains how their arousal has shaped their emotional experience? The Schachter-Singer two-factor theory. Physiological arousal has been given a catastrophic cognitive label, producing intense fear. Question 2. A patient with social anxiety notices their heart pounding before a presentation and concludes they are about to humiliate themselves. Which concept does this illustrate? Misattribution of arousal. Anxiety-related arousal is being attributed to evidence of impending failure, reinforcing the anxiety. Question 3. What did the suspension bridge study demonstrate? Fear-related arousal was misattributed to attraction. Question 4. 2 patients receive the same diagnosis, but one feels devastated while the other feels determined. What does Lazarus's model say about why? They differ in their primary and secondary appraisal. The emotion follows the appraisal of the situation, not the situation itself. Question 5. A therapist helps a patient reframe a difficult experience as an opportunity for growth rather than a sign of failure. Which mechanism is being used? Reappraisal, which is the deliberate revision of an interpretation to alter its emotional impact. Let's summarise what we have learnt today. The Schachter-Singer two-factor theory proposes that emotion results from physiological arousal combined with a cognitive label applied to explain it. Misattribution of arousal shows that arousal from one source can be attributed to a different cause, altering emotional experience. Lazarus's cognitive appraisal theory places cognitive appraisal at the centre of emotional experience. Primary appraisal evaluates the significance of a situation. Secondary appraisal evaluates coping resources. Reappraisal, the deliberate revision of interpretations, is a cornerstone of cognitive behavioural therapy. In the next episode of our emotion series, we will explore primary emotions, the debate around their universality, and the relationship between emotional arousal and performance. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of MRCpsych on the Go Revision Essentials. I hope this episode helped to move your revision forward. If you have any questions or just want to continue the discussion, you can find me on LinkedIn at MRCpsych on the Go, spelled MRCPsych on the Go. This podcast is about making revision accessible. If you found it useful, liking and sharing it with others helps the goal more than anything else. That's it for today. I'm Dr. Alap, and as always, keep revising on the go.